I owe you nothing, he said coldly, dismissing her like she was invisible. Jennifer stood in the gleaming lobby, mud-stained and humiliated, as the billionaire walked away. That should have been the end of their story. Instead, it was just the beginning. From a chance meeting at a cafe to an unexpected job offer, their paths kept crossing in ways that defied coincidence. But when office politics turn deadly and Jennifer is accused of corporate espionage, she discovers that falling for your enemy comes with a price neither of them was prepared to pay. Jennifer stood frozen on the sidewalk, mud dripping from her once pristine outfit. The man who stepped out of the luxury car looked completely unfazed by what he'd done. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Jennifer's voice trembled with rage as she gestured at her ruined clothes. I have a job interview in 20 minutes. My last chance after months of rejections. Bryan Hartford glanced at his watch impatiently. Look, I'm running late for a meeting. Here. He pulled out his wallet and extracted several crisp bills. Get yourself cleaned up. Jennifer stared at the money in disbelief. I don't want your money. I want an apology and some basic human decency. Bryan's expression hardened. I've offered compensation. Take it or leave it. He turned away dismissively. You think throwing money solves everything? Jennifer called after him. People like you never have to face consequences, do you? Something in her words made Bryan pause. He turned, studying her with newfound interest before stepping back into his car and driving away. 30 minutes later, Jennifer sat across from a hiring manager who couldn't hide her distaste at Jennifer's appearance. The interview lasted barely 5 minutes before Jennifer was politely but firmly shown the door, the rejection evident in the manager's tight smile. Back in her tiny apartment, Jennifer calculated her dwindling finances. The rent was due in a week, utility bills were piling up, and her student loan payment loomed. After sending out another dozen applications, she reluctantly applied for a position at Café Soleil, a small coffee shop downtown. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was balancing 3 coffee orders when she heard a familiar voice. Americano black. She looked up to see Bryan Hartford seated at the counter, recognition dawning in his eyes. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she prepared his order, feeling his gaze follow her movements. You're the woman from the street, he said when she returned with his coffee. And you're the man who ruined my interview, she replied flatly, turning to help another customer. When her shift ended, Jennifer was surprised to find Bryan still there, now occupying a corner table with his laptop. I have a proposition for you, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer, Jennifer replied, untying her apron. Not even a job that pays 3 times what you make here. His expression was calculating rather than apologetic. I need an executive assistant who isn't afraid to speak her mind. Jennifer laughed bitterly. You want to hire me because I yelled at you? I want to hire you because you stood your ground against someone most people wouldn't dare challenge. That kind of backbone is rare in my world. Jennifer's mind raced. The money would solve her immediate problems, but working for this arrogant man. Why should I work for someone who couldn't even apologize for ruining my clothes and my interview? Because I suspect you need this job more than you need an apology. His bluntness was infuriating because it was true. Desperation drove Jennifer to accept Bryan's proposition, but survival would require much more than just technical competence. Behind the sleek glass walls of Hartford Enterprises, an invisible war was already brewing against her. Led by a woman who had once claimed Bryan's heart, and wasn't prepared to share his attention with a coffee shop girl who dared to rise above her station. Jennifer's first day at Hartford Enterprises felt like stepping onto alien terrain. The marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and employees in tailored designer suits eyed her with thinly veiled contempt. Despite her careful wardrobe selection, the most professional outfit her budget allowed, she felt branded as an outsider. The whispers followed her through corridors, growing louder each time she entered Bryan's office. Did you see her? No degree, no experience, one mud splash, and suddenly she's executive assistant to the CEO? Ruth Winters, chief marketing officer, and Bryan's former flame, watched this unfold with calculating eyes. Her strategy began subtly, forgetting to include Jennifer in important email chains, scheduling conflicts that made Jennifer appear incompetent, and casual remarks that undermined her confidence during meetings. Meanwhile, Bryan proved to be a demanding boss who pushed Jennifer to her limits. While other assistants managed standard schedules and correspondence, he assigned Jennifer complex financial reports and competitor analyses well beyond typical administrative duties. "I didn't hire you because I thought you were like everyone else," he said when she questioned the workload. "I hired you because you weren't afraid to stand up to me on that sidewalk." The rumors evolved quickly. "She's sleeping with him," became the favored explanation for her presence. Why else would he keep her around? The whispers grew so loud they eventually reached Jennifer as she collected documents from the printer. The laughter from the break room fell silent as she entered, faces flushed with the guilt of having been overheard. That afternoon, Bryan found her, staring blankly at her computer screen, fighting back tears. Without a word, he marched to the break room where the gossip had originated. "Jennifer is here because she earned it," his voice carried through the office. "Anyone who suggests otherwise clearly hasn't been paying attention to her work or is revealing their own insecurities." The silence that followed was deafening. The next morning, Jennifer arrived to find a coffee on her desk, made exactly how she preferred it. When her computer crashed before a crucial presentation, Bryan appeared at her side, retrieving the backup files she hadn't known existed. These small kindnesses revealed glimpses of the man beneath the demanding exterior. Their dynamic shifted further when Jennifer stumbled carrying reports, sending papers flying. Bryan caught her before she fell, his hands steadying her waist. For a brief moment, neither moved, caught in unexpected proximity, the chemistry between them undeniable. "Careful," he whispered, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. While Bryan's hands still remembered the warmth of Jennifer's waist, Ruth was methodically executing her most devastating plan yet. The brief tenderness between Jennifer and Bryan had not gone unnoticed, especially by Ruth, who watched their growing closeness with calculating eyes. Jennifer's rapid rise at Hartford Enterprises had transformed her from an amusing distraction into a genuine threat in Ruth's mind. What began as mild sabotage would now escalate into something far more sinister: corporate espionage. 3 days after their moment of connection, Bryan stormed into Jennifer's office, his face hardened into an unfamiliar mask of contempt. He slammed a folder onto her desk, confidential documents splayed open, company designs and proprietary information that had somehow reached their biggest competitor. "Care to explain why your login credentials accessed these files at 2 a.m. last Tuesday?" His voice was ice, nothing like the soft whisper she'd heard days before. "Or why your personal email was found sending them to Meridian Corp." Jennifer stared at the evidence before her, incomprehension giving way to horror. "Bryan, I didn't. This isn't possible. I was home asleep. I would never." Save it, he cut her off, the warmth in his eyes extinguished. Security footage shows you entering the building that night. Your keycard was used. Your computer accessed the files. The accusations struck like physical blows. Jennifer fought to breathe as Bryan continued. You're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you out. In that moment, Jennifer realized the most devastating aspect wasn't losing her job. It was how quickly Bryan had reverted to seeing her as the enemy, how easily he'd believed the worst without question. The man who had defended her publicly now condemned her privately without hesitation. At home, Jennifer cycled through shock, tears, and finally, rage. The helplessness transformed into something fiercer: determination. She had fought for everything in her life. She wouldn't stop now. With methodical precision, she began documenting timelines, gathering her own evidence, and reaching out to the few allies she'd made at Hartford. Max from IT was the first to notice discrepancies. "Jennifer, these access logs don't make sense," he confided over coffee. "The digital footprint doesn't match your usual patterns, and there's a strange gap in the building's security footage, just 3 minutes missing right before you supposedly entered." Together, they dug deeper, tracing the breach to an unauthorized access point. When Max reviewed additional security footage, the truth emerged. Ruth, staying late, had accessed Jennifer's unattended computer, installing remote access software while Jennifer was in a meeting. The final proof came when building security footage revealed Ruth entering Jennifer's office at 1:58 a.m. using a cloned key card. For 16 minutes, she methodically planted the false evidence that would frame Jennifer perfectly. Bryan's face drained of color as he watched the footage. "I've made a terrible mistake," he whispered, immediately firing Ruth and attempting to contact Jennifer. But Jennifer had already rebuilt the walls around her heart, walls that had momentarily lowered for Bryan. His texts and calls went unanswered. His office visits met with empty apartments. Those unanswered calls and empty apartments told a clear story. Jennifer was done. But what happens when the person who broke your trust refuses to accept that ending? Bryan's journey from entitled CEO to a man willing to dismantle his own pride publicly would test the boundaries between persistence and respect, and force Jennifer to confront whether some breaches of trust might actually be mendable. 3 weeks after the truth came to light, Bryan stood before a sea of reporters and industry insiders. The man who once commanded rooms with effortless authority now displayed something entirely different: vulnerability. "I failed not only as a CEO, but as a human being," he admitted, voice steady but humbled. "I believed evidence without question and condemned someone without proper investigation. Jennifer Clark deserves more than my apology. She deserves her reputation restored completely." Cameras flashed as he detailed Ruth's deception and Jennifer's innocence, each word a brick removed from the wall of his own carefully constructed image. Far from the corporate spotlight, Jennifer watched the press conference on her laptop, fingers trembling against her coffee mug. The vindication felt hollow against the memory of his accusatory stare, how quickly he'd believed the worst of her. She closed the laptop before he finished speaking. The first letter arrived the following day. Not an email or text, but handwritten on heavy stationery, detailing not excuses, but acknowledgments. "I reacted from fear, not reason," he wrote. "Fear that someone I was beginning to care for could hurt me first." More letters followed, never demanding response, only offering pieces of himself she'd never seen. Stories of childhood abandonment, of walls built by wealth, of learning to trust no one. Alongside came small, thoughtful gestures, her favorite pastries from the cafe where they'd reconnected, books by authors she'd mentioned once in passing. He's persistent. I'll give him that, Jennifer told her sister over lunch, trying to sound unmoved despite the corners of a new letter peeking from her purse. The question isn't whether he's persistent, her sister replied, but whether you still feel something worth risking your heart for. Jennifer's reluctance wasn't simple pride. Each time she considered reaching back, fear gripped her. The memory of standing accused, judged, and dismissed without defense. Yet something in Bryan's unwavering patience stirred what she thought had died. He wasn't demanding forgiveness. He was earning it, consistently and without expectation. 6 weeks after the scandal broke, Jennifer texted back, "One dinner. That's all I'm promising." They met at a small neighborhood restaurant, neutral territory. The billionaire who once commanded attention now sat tentatively, waiting for her lead. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the admission itself a new kind of strength. "I've never had to rebuild something I destroyed." "That's the thing about trust," Jennifer replied, meeting his gaze directly. "It's not rebuilt all at once. It's earned back in moments, small decisions that prove who you really are." That night marked the first cautious step in a delicate dance. There were setbacks, moments when old wounds reopened, when Jennifer pulled away, when Bryan's impatience surfaced. But beneath it all ran a current of authentic connection that neither could deny. Their journey from a mud-splashed confrontation to standing together as partners wasn't simply about forgiveness. It was a profound metamorphosis for both of them. True redemption demanded that Bryan face his deepest character flaws with unflinching honesty, while Jennifer found the courage to be vulnerable again, despite having been deeply wounded. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of stars, their guests witnessed a celebration of love transformed through hardship. Their intertwined fingers represented a relationship that had shattered and been meticulously rebuilt, stronger at the broken places, like gold-filled cracks in restored pottery. Their hands, now joined in marriage, told the silent story of two people who discovered that life's most painful fragments, when carefully reassembled, create something more beautiful than what existed before.